interesting you talk about education. We have something here you don't necessarily know about called the Gonski Report on how we reform secondary education across the land. And the only thing that's stopping it, it's going to cost about $6.5 billion. Now that's the worth of one bloke called Jamie Packer in this country, and about a fifth of the wage of one person called Gina in this country. There is money around. Next.
Well, I think with regards to philanthropy, I think there are marvelous philanthropists, and then as we know in America, there are tax dodgers. And so you have to understand a little bit the reality of the situation. I spent 12 years in Europe, and you can't actually get a dollar out of a gnat's ass there. Well, philanthropy is a non-existent, and one of the reasons.
It's not non-existent. I mean, there are extremely effective philanthropists working in Britain.
It's true, but they are very, very rare, and I think there's not a great incentive to give back in the way that.
I think the tide is changing, but anyway.
Well, I hope that would be terrific. But in terms of the local versus top-down sort of institutional wisdom, the whole problem with the way that society thinks about government is that it's supposed to be this sort of wisdom generating sort of body, and that we simply will do what we're told to do. And you go to these little towns in Italy. I lived in Rome for 10 years, and it's an ecosystem in there. It's a human ecosystem, and the elders are the ones that are actually the ones that have most of the brains, and they sit around and teach the young ones, and the middle sector of the age group actually goes and plows the fields, and it all sort of works. And if there are disputes, they're worked out in a way that everybody knows about, and you can't argue with success. It really does work. And if you look at the Italian government, what a shambles it is. And you realize that country couldn't give less of a monkey's toss about what the government is doing, and it works perfectly well. I mean, I saw 3 governments rise and fall during my time there, and nobody seemed to mind. And one of the reasons is because they've held on to the small is beautiful aspect of human interaction. And the same thing occurs in laboratories. It occurs in anywhere where you have kernels of people who are working together, and we underestimate how powerful that can be.
Absolutely.
Italian government in Canberra, that would be wonderful. Might be fun.
So this is such a topic, infinitely dear to my heart. And first thing is that, and I'll just talk about American politics and its weakness. I'll mention some of its greatness. Thomas Jefferson wrote, before he was president and after he was president, that light and education were the greatest defense of people and the way of government. And by light he meant knowledge, like the newspaper or facts. Named education as the ability to understand and interpret those facts. And he had these radical ideas like take children away from their parents and teach them how to read and write. Things like that. Because why let them vote if they don't know what they're voting about? It's not really voting. So, to me, an educated populace is incredibly important, personally. And educated doesn't mean you have a tradesman education. I mean, it means you have what we've heard over here, a liberal arts education, a philosophical underpinning that you've read Plato and just debated that. You've read poetry and understood that. You have a rich and productive life, preparation to really value things. For example, to value people who you disagree with as interesting people. Now most people learn those things from their parents, if they learn them, from their church, if they learn them. They don't learn them from YouTube. I mean, they don't come from ephemeral things. I understand that. So we have to teach people those things, or we have no hope at all. We must. So this kind of education is just basically the fundamental act of parenting.
And finally,
I've got 3 sound bites: one on education, one on leadership, and one on government. Okay, so education, because that's the first one. I think people often confuse nowadays information with knowledge. And information is a perfectly good thing to traffic in. It's wonderful. We all benefit from that. But the problem arises when it's confused with wisdom. And for me, the difference is that when you truly understand something, you're joining up the dots. You're seeing one thing in terms of something else. The much used argument I always give is my little brother, who I used to torture when he was 3, and I forced him to learn Shakespeare when I was 16, and he would be able to recite off Macbeth, out, brief, candle, but he didn't understand it because he couldn't see the metaphor of the extinction of candle and the extinction of light. So yes, he could download, he could give the right response. Is that education? Because you have a 3-year-old parroting Shakespeare? I don't think so. Yeah. So I think what we have to do is conceive of ways, and I'm glad you said that about YouTube, of joining up the dots, of developing an internal conceptual structure. And your boss, Eric Schmidt, is well known for saying, I still believe that the really best way to learn something is sitting down and reading a book, because that puts things into a context. That's the first thing. Second thing about government, it strikes me that we could go back to a pre-industrial revolution scenario. And again, I'm seeing it through the prism of Europe, where you had the city-states. People are very comfortable, the polis. They're very comfortable being about 1 million. So we could go back to having Savoy and Bavaria and Corsica and Cornwall could be separate, you know. Wales certainly be. Ballarat could be separate. Yeah, so obviously they're halfway there anyway. So, no, but people I think would be comfortable if culturally, gastronomically, linguistically, they were a very well defined and relatively small community under a big federal umbrella. And my own hope for Europe would be that one has much more defined subpopulations of the city-states that may under some kind of more general Europe umbrella. But that's why I gather India did very well, because they had 25 states, and Nehru decided to let many of those, all those states have an autonomy and a character and an independence that gave them a sense of identity, which is what I think everyone wants. And that comes on. My third point about a leader is we must distinguish leaders and managers. And I won't name names because this is in public, but we can all think of politicians in our various countries who may be good managers, but don't have that leadership quality. And I think the leadership quality is someone who has a vision. Someone say, imagine a world like Churchill did in the war to the British. Imagine the sunny uplands. Imagine doing this. You know? And I think the quality of leadership is to actually show people what may be possible.
May I introduce our leader, Tanya?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, what can I say? That was not a nightcap, but an appetizer for the next 2 days. Can you give a warm round of applause to Jason Brooke, Ian McGilchrist, Nadia Rosenthal, Michael T. Jones, and Baroness Susan Greenfield, and the wonderful Ron Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you at 8:30 in the morning in your seats, ready for the spectacular opening. I promise it will be spectacular. And we're rehearsing all night, so have a great sleep. Take care.